I used to believe that the smallest moments in life were harmless, tiny, forgettable details that drifted past without shaping anything important. But now I know that a single sentence, spoken casually and without hesitation, can split a life cleanly in two. Mine changed on a quiet Thursday evening when my daughter-in-law Valerie called with a soft, apologetic tone. "Mom, dinner's canceled tonight," she said, using the kind of gentle voice reserved for fragile news. I didn't question her. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? For months, I had been trying to build a warmer relationship with her, trying to understand the elegant, distant woman my son had chosen. Valerie always appeared perfectly composed, sleeves pressed, hair glossy, smile poised. She moved through life as if every room she entered had been waiting for her. I, on the other hand, was simply Eleanor, a 63-year-old widow who preferred quiet evenings, worn recipe books, and the comfort of routines. I wanted us to connect, but our interactions often felt like carefully choreographed dances in which I was always half a step behind. My son, Andrew, believed everything was fine. He reassured me constantly, insisting Valerie cared, insisting she respected me, insisting I only needed to give her time. And because I loved him, I agreed. I tried. I listened. I waited for that warmth to appear. So when Valerie canceled dinner, I didn't read into it. I accepted it without suspicion, without even a flicker of doubt. I slipped on my coat anyway, thinking a walk would settle the mild disappointment tugging at me. The air that evening was crisp, carrying the scent of the sea and distant pine. Our coastal town wrapped itself in a dim, early twilight, its storefronts glowing like lanterns guiding late wanderers home. I wandered without direction, letting the rhythmic tap of my shoes echo against the sidewalk. When I turned a corner, the soft clatter of dishes and hum of conversation drifted from the new seafood restaurant Valerie had chosen for our dinner. Its tall windows spilled warm, golden light across the street. I slowed my steps, drawn in by the glow, not expecting anything more than a passing glance. But through the glass at a corner table sat Valerie, adorned in a sleek burgundy dress, raising a glass of wine. Beside her was Andrew, relaxed and smiling, as if the world outside that window didn't exist. They weren't alone. Friends surrounded them, leaning close, laughing warmly. It was a celebration, full and vibrant. My breath hitched. Confusion struck first, quick and sharp. Then disbelief. Then something colder. I watched, frozen in place, as the waiter approached with the check. Valerie reached into her purse, retrieving a sapphire blue credit card identical to mine. She handed it over without hesitation, her expression smooth, practiced, utterly familiar. In that moment, a small but unmistakable rupture formed inside me. Quiet, sharp, undeniable. Dinner hadn't been canceled. It had been concealed. And whatever story lay beneath that one glimpse through the window, I knew it wouldn't be simple. I left the restaurant window with a hollow tightness in my chest, the kind that makes breathing feel like effort. The cold night air stung my cheeks, but the sharper sting came from realizing something fundamental had shifted. Trust, once bruised, doesn't quietly heal. It starts asking questions you've avoided for far too long. As I walked home, one question kept echoing. How long had this been happening? Inside my house, the familiar warmth of my small kitchen wrapped around me, but even that comfort felt thinner than usual. I set my purse down, sat at the table, and stared at the faint scratches on its wooden surface. I had spent years carving family dinners, birthday cakes, and holiday feasts into that table's history. Now I wondered how much of that history had been slowly rewritten behind my back. My relationship with Andrew had always been steadfast. He was the child who stayed late after school to help teachers clean up, the teenager who called me even when he didn't need anything, the young man who held my hand at his father's funeral when my grief made me unsteady. When he and Valerie married, I told myself I could adapt to her polish, her high expectations, her brisk way of speaking. I assumed she'd eventually soften, that she'd see me as something more than an obligation. But tonight's discovery painted a different picture, one in which I was neither included nor respected. I opened my banking app, something I rarely did alone. The numbers blinking back at me didn't make sense at first. They looked foreign, like symbols from a language I'd forgotten. Dozens of transactions scrolled past my vision. Restaurant bills, designer stores, hotel charges, online purchases I couldn't even name. My heartbeat scattered into a faster rhythm the more I scrolled. Each charge was a thread pulled from a rug I hadn't realized was unraveling. I closed the app abruptly, unable to look anymore. The kitchen walls felt too close, as if the house itself understood the betrayal before I allowed myself to accept it. I reached for my tea tin out of habit, but stopped halfway. Comfort felt undeserved when the truth demanded clarity. I needed someone who would listen, someone who knew me beyond pleasantries. My neighbor Martha had lived next door for 20 years. She was steady, practical, the type of woman who always kept spare batteries, warm blankets, and hard truths. Without giving myself time to reconsider, I grabbed my coat and stepped back outside. Martha opened her door before I even knocked fully. "Ellie, what happened?" The expression on her face, concern without judgment, nearly made me cry. I stepped inside and told her everything. The canceled dinner, the restaurant, the card, the charges lined up like confessions waiting to be read. She listened without interruption, her eyes sharp and sympathetic. When I finished, she laid a hand on my arm. "This isn't small," she said softly. "And it isn't accidental." Her words didn't comfort me, but they steadied me. They also revealed something I had been too frightened to admit. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of something much darker. And I needed to face it. The next morning arrived with a gray sky and a heaviness that refused to lift, as if the weather itself understood the weight pressing against my chest. I moved through the house slowly, every familiar object reminding me of how confidently I had once relied on my son. Trust, I realized, doesn't simply evaporate. It fractures, leaving sharp edges you keep brushing against no matter how carefully you move. Still, I needed answers, not more denial. Martha stopped by just after breakfast, carrying her usual decisiveness like armor. "You can't face this alone," she said, her tone firm but compassionate. "You need someone who knows how to navigate situations like this." She handed me a business card belonging to a local attorney named Denise Caldwell, an expert in financial disputes, according to Martha. The idea of involving anyone outside my small circle made my stomach twist, yet the alternative felt far worse. Remaining in the dark would allow the wound to deepen. With trembling fingers, I called and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Denise's office sat inside a modest brick building a few blocks from the courthouse. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, a scent that stirred memories of my years working in the school library. Denise herself, a poised woman with streaks of silver in her hair, greeted me with a handshake that felt both gentle and unyielding. She didn't waste words. She simply invited me to sit and asked me to recount everything from the canceled dinner to the banking app revelations. As I spoke, she took notes with swift, precise strokes. She asked for clarification only when necessary, her questions always targeted, never intrusive. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, studying me with a gaze that balanced professionalism and empathy. "Mrs. Parker," she said steadily, "what you're describing suggests a pattern of unauthorized use, not isolated incidents." Her voice carried a certainty that made my skin prickle. "To understand the full scope, I'll need access to all financial records connected to your accounts." The idea of handing over my entire financial life felt unsettling, yet I understood the necessity. I agreed, and Denise promised to review everything within a week. As I left her office, a sense of fragile relief settled over me. Not comfort, but the faint reassurance that someone finally understood the severity of my situation. Back home, the hours passed slowly, each one filled with questions that spiraled into new questions. The betrayal felt bigger than the money. It felt personal, targeted, deliberate. I kept remembering Valerie's effortless smile at the restaurant, the way she had held my card like it belonged to her. 5 days later, Denise called. "Eleanor," she said, her tone cautious yet decisive, "I've reviewed your records. You need to come in as soon as you can." My breath caught. Something in her voice, controlled, weighty, confirmed what I already feared. The truth wasn't just bad. It was far worse than I had imagined. And there was no turning back. Denise didn't speak immediately when I entered her office. Instead, she gestured gently for me to sit, her expression shadowed by something heavier than simple concern. The blinds behind her desk were half drawn, letting in narrow stripes of afternoon light that cut across her folders like pale scars. My pulse thudded in my ears. I knew whatever she was about to reveal would shift the ground beneath my feet again. "Eleanor," she began, folding her hands neatly, "I need you to prepare yourself." Her tone was calm, deliberate, an anchor in a rising storm. She slid a thick stack of documents toward me. "Your son and daughter-in-law have been accessing your accounts for nearly 3 years. 3 years. The words landed like a blow. I felt my breath wobble as I flipped through the pages, the evidence laid out in unforgiving black print. Vacations I'd never heard about. Jewelry I'd never seen. Home renovations for a house that wasn't mine. Each charge felt like a small betrayal, but together they formed something monstrous. Denise continued. Altogether, they've used over $300,000. Most of it appears intentional, not accidental or negligent. These are planned withdrawals, often transferred to accounts under Valerie's name. My throat tightened, my voice barely forming. 300, how could I not see this? Because you trusted them, she said softly. And because financial exploitation often hides behind familiarity. The room felt colder, as though the truth had pulled the warmth out of the air. I remembered Andrew as a boy, his eager grin when he'd bring me hand-drawn cards, his habit of checking if I'd locked the doors at night, the protective arm he'd wrap around me in crowded places. I tried to reconcile that child with the adult who had quietly stripped me of nearly everything I owned. A bitter ache lodged itself in my chest. Denise leaned forward, her voice steady. We have enough evidence to confront them legally. But before we take that step, you need to decide how you want to proceed. This isn't just financial, it's emotional. The fallout could be significant. Significant. The word felt woefully small for the devastation swirling inside me. I stared at the documents again, each page a reminder that my son had crossed a line so deep it felt bottomless. Valerie's name appeared again and again, bold, unashamed, threaded through every theft. Her smile at the restaurant replayed in my mind, transforming from polished confidence into something predatory. I want the truth, I whispered. All of it. And you'll have it, Denise replied. But I advise we bring someone who can corroborate your experience, someone who can be present when you confront them. Her meaning was clear. She meant Martha. For the first time since the restaurant, a spark of resolve flickered inside me. Pain still throbbed beneath it, but the spark remained. I would confront them, with witnesses, facts, and a strength I wasn't sure I had. Because the next step wasn't about fear anymore. It was about reclaiming what was mine. Eleanor arrived at the courthouse with a calmness that surprised even her. For months she had lived in a storm of betrayal, grief, and disbelief, but today felt different, steadier, almost peaceful. Her neighbor, Mr. Holbrook, walked beside her, carrying the neatly organized folders that held every receipt, transfer, and forged authorization. Each document represented a wound she hadn't deserved, yet each one also proved her resilience. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with routine noise, shuffling papers, murmured conversations, the occasional distant cough. Eleanor sat in the front row, hands clasped, listening to the rhythmic clicking of the stenographer's keys. When the judge called the case, she rose, feeling her spine straighten with a quiet strength she hadn't felt in years. Valerie entered first, wearing an expression that mixed irritation with forced innocence. Andrew followed behind her, avoiding his mother's gaze entirely. He looked older somehow, nervous, exhausted, and smaller than she remembered. Eleanor's heart tugged painfully, but she didn't let the emotion soften her. The lawyer she'd hired, Ms. Crane, presented the evidence with crisp efficiency. There was no embellishment, no theatrics, just the truth laid out plainly. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals. Luxury purchases charged to Eleanor's accounts. Forged signatures that matched Andrew's handwriting exactly. Screenshots of Valerie's messages bragging about their endless fountain of cash. And, most damning of all, the restaurant surveillance footage capturing the moment they toasted with her credit card hours after canceling dinner with her. Each revelation struck like a stone, and Eleanor watched as her son's face paled shade by shade. Valerie's composure fractured, her lips tightening as Ms. Crane dismantled every lie she'd prepared. When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, the courtroom grew still. She stepped to the stand and took a breath that trembled only once. I raised my son to be honest, she began, her voice clear and steady. To respect people, to stand on his own feet, and to value family above all else. I don't recognize the man who sits there today. But I refuse to let the woman I am be erased by what he and his wife have done. Her words weren't dramatic, but they resonated with a deep, unvarnished sincerity that left the room quiet long after she finished. By the time Ms. Crane concluded, the outcome was unmistakable. The judge ruled decisively: restitution, property returned to Eleanor, and full financial control restored to her. Valerie's face twisted in fury, but Andrew simply lowered his head, silent, defeated. Walking out of the courthouse, Eleanor felt neither triumph nor bitterness. What she felt was release, a slow, cleansing exhale that seemed to carry months of weight off her shoulders. There were wounds still healing, and memories she wished she could forget, but the path ahead felt open again. And for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor felt ready to step forward.